Humanity Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan, and today's episode of Raised by Survivor on hmTv will feature my very special guest, Sophal Ear. Sophal is no ordinary guest, I promise you. He's a Cambodian-American scholar, author, and survivor who has dedicated his entire life to exploring the lessons of genocides, authoritarianism, and resilience. His personal journey from escaping the Khmer Rouge to becoming a leading voice on global development and human rights is both inspiring and deeply relevant to our mission here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. Today, Sophal and I will be talking about intergenerational trauma, the dangers of authoritarianism, and the power of education and memory to build resilience and hope. Together, we'll explore the connections between Cambodia's history and the Holocaust and what those lessons mean for us and for future generations. Sophal Ear, welcome to hmTV.
Thank you, Bernie.
Tell me, what do you believe is the most urgent lesson we must take from your story and your work?
Gosh, the most urgent story or lesson we must take from my own story would be the idea that humanity matters. Humanity can save lives. The escape of my mother from the Khmer Rouge with her 5 kids was made possible by strangers who decided to help her. People who noticed her Vietnamese wasn't very good at all or barely existent, and who decided to spend days sergeant drilling her or drill sergeant, playing drill sergeant to her in terms of improving her Vietnamese so that she could have a better shot at passing. These strangers, whose names I barely know, I mean, her name was Kotau, made my life possible because they saved her life, and the actions of countless individuals along the way made it possible for us to then get to Vietnam, get to family in Vietnam who could help us, because we were, even after having escaped the Khmer Rouge, in a situation where we would have been sent to a terrible sort of commune-like life in the countryside of Vietnam with conditions that weren't much better than under the Khmer Rouge. But my mom met a friend, an old neighbor who said she would get word to her sister in Ho Chi Minh City, and by doing that, my uncle came down the Mekong and rescued us within a day or two, and just before the deadline to leave the camp zone. So, I mean, the lesson is that we're all able, and more than, we can all be heroes. Even if we're hidden heroes, we can all do things that can help others. And that capacity isn't diminished at all by lack of means or wealth or anything like that. It's simply a willingness to help and to act when the time is needed.
Beautifully said. And there's a lot of parallel between your story and my parents' story. There were a lot of good people along the way, Upstanders, who protected them, fed them, hid them, and they took huge risks, not only for their own lives, but their entire families. In fact, unfortunately, there was a family who rescued my dad, who kept him in their home, and they were all killed just because they were harboring a 10-year-old Jewish boy. And so my father had to live with that guilt. And we teach young people today to stand up against injustice. But we attempt to foster empathy, and I think that's the key. I think you mentioned the same thing in so many ways, is that we want people to be more empathetic to other people because we're all related, aren't we? According to genetics, we are somewhere between 15th and 50th cousins, all of us, every person that you meet. So we could certainly treat each other a lot better, knowing just that fact alone. You are a survivor. You were young, but you did survive the Khmer Rouge. And so your journey to America led you through a lot of different things in life. It was quite a journey, not just to America, but in America. You've done a lot of great things, and you've spoken at TED Talks. Tell me a little bit about that, and how did that happen?
Well, it's a fascinating story. I was teaching at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, as an assistant professor, and on a flight, I think it might have been from Boston to, or maybe the Denver to Monterey leg of the flight, I was upgraded miraculously and sat next to a gentleman named Bud who told me he was going to this conference that would have Al Gore speaking there and other luminaries. And I thought, what is he talking about? I've never heard of such a conference bringing such big names to Monterey. And it turned out to be the TED conference. He told me about it. I, of course, was curious and found out that it cost thousands and thousands of dollars to actually attend in person, and put it aside, thinking that it was going to be impossible for anybody like me to elbow my way into that. A few months later, TED came out with a TED Fellows program, and Bud sent me an email, let me know about it. He didn't work for TED. He was just one of the TEDsters, people who attend the TED conference. And I think I was in Cambodia doing some research, as you know, as professors do. And so I thought, oh, I'll just fill it out. And I didn't have anything super special about why I should be selected as a TED Fellow, but I did publish in 2005 in the New York Times Sunday magazine on its last page, a lives page, which is a one-page story, usually in the first person. And I had this idea in 2005 of let's have my mom tell me the story of her escape, and because I had seen it as person A as told to person B. And usually there's nothing about person A and person B. They're not actually related. They're just, the person B is the translator, interpreter. But I thought it'd be cute to end it with actually person A is the mom and person B is the child. And this is where we are, because the signature would end with me being, at the time, I think, a PhD candidate at Berkeley. So I included that story with my application. And I think it made the difference. It was the story of, it's One Way Out, titled One Way Out. And it was my family's escape from the Khmer Rouge, as told to me by my mother. And by submitting this, I got selected as a TED Fellow. The day that I got word of it, I happened to be in Boston, scheduled to have dinner with Bud, the second time I would ever see him from that flight when we met on in business class. And that's when I got to tell him that I was picked as a TED Fellow. I mean, I can't imagine a more serendipitous timing than the very man who introduced me to TED, who sent me an email out of the blue to say, hey, you should think about this, apply for the TED Fellowship, to then be at his dinner table at his home in Merrimackport, Massachusetts, for a celebration of that, of getting selected. And then from there, of course, it required more, because it's not that you become a TED Fellow and you get to give a TED Talk. Very few of the TED Fellows actually get to give a TED Talk, but I applied as part of the process of attending TED to give a talk, and was picked. And of course, I thought that as an assistant professor, as an academic, I should talk about my research and the things, and the type of stuff professors talk about. Certainly not my family's escape from Cambodia, from the Khmer Rouge. But TED knew better, and basically the people at TED sort of steered me towards, we want you to do this. And it was a struggle, frankly, because nobody ever in academia feels comfortable necessarily talking about themselves in that way. They want to be known for their research. They don't want to be known for their lived experience or things that happened to them. So it continues to be kind of this struggle of like, who am I? Do I want to be out there in this way? And I've learned over the decade plus since then, decade and a half, to kind of embrace that identity So Ted, of course, knew what to do. I mean, I speak about Ted as if it's a person. It was a person that I dealt with, but the conference itself is just is known as Ted, and so they knew how to do a show. Okay, so they decided that even though I was the only person who was supposed to attend, they said, why don't we fly out your mother and have her be in the front row, in front of the stage, just as you end your talk, and you can introduce her. And so they did, and she's there. My wife, who was 9 months pregnant, just about, was also there with her, and she gets to stand up and receive a standing ovation at the end of my talk. And it's because I tell her story. I tell the world, in that sense, what she did, and what an opportunity and an honor it was to get that chance, because so many, I think, survivors or children of survivors never have that opportunity. The night before my TED Talk, Ted had organized this kind of multi-block party, taking over all the restaurants in Long Beach, California, because the conference had moved to Long Beach by then in 2009. And the server at the very dining table that I ate at that evening, the night before my talk, was a Cambodian young woman whose own story was exactly the same. I mean, she said, "Oh, because I'm Cambodian. We're talking to each other," and I tell her, I'm going to give a talk about my family's escape. We escaped via Vietnam, and she said, "Yeah, that's what my family did." So it was incredible to kind of see how fortunate I was to be tapped on the shoulder to give this talk, and to tell really the story of so many more people than just my own story, right? I mean, it is my story, but it is the story of the people who had to find a way out of Cambodia, whether it's like my wife's family and herself through Thailand and refugee camps at Khao Dang, or in the case of my family through Vietnam by pretending to be Vietnamese. It's such an honor and an opportunity to be that spokesperson for a moment, and to not be, okay, that's my story and that's it, but really it's the story of so many more people than my own. And she didn't get to have that chance, but I tried basically to be that spokesperson for more than myself, in other words.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful story. First of all, I'm sure your mother was very proud of you when she sat up there at the front row looking at her son tell the story. And I know that when my dad and mom were alive, I wasn't telling their story at that time. I wasn't telling the story of the Holocaust. I am now. They're long gone, but I wish they were around to hear what I have to say. But you've made some comparisons of the Cambodian genocide and the Holocaust, and I'm sure you've done some studies, and I'm sure there's some similarities and some differences. I have just a couple of questions about that. And first of all, during the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were killed. I'd like to know, what was the exact number of Cambodians killed, and was it an ethnic or political persecution? What was the reason for that? Also, Hitler not only persecuted and exterminated Jews, but also people of color, gypsies, prisoners of war. It goes on and on, a whole list of minorities, and gay people as well. So if we compare the two, where's the parallelism and where's the contrast?
Right. Well, so for Cambodia, the genocide is estimated between 1.5 and 2+ million. So the general number that's used or conventionally accepted is 1.7 million deaths. This is well established over the years, although, there are people who have doubted the genocide, just as there are people who keep questioning the Holocaust. And of course, they want to minimize the numbers, or they want to claim that it wasn't that many or whatnot, or more people died during U.S. bombing campaigns and whatnot. But in the case,
But that's where they're similar in that there are people out there that are claiming. How long did that take for the 1.7 million Cambodians to be killed? I mean, what was the period?
The period of time was about 4 years, of 1975 to 1979. I mean, people who survived it will literally talk about years, months, days, in the sense of that's how long they had to survive. They had to get through that in order to end up alive on the other end of this terrible, terrible sausage making machine that the Khmer Rouge created. And when you talk, Bernie, about, who did the Khmer Rouge target, it's fascinating, because in the case of Cambodia, the very people who question, what to call the genocide, whether to even call it a genocide, are the ones who will say, well, you see, you can't have a genocide of a people against themselves. That would, in French, it would be auto-genocide, and that's not accepted. So it always has to be the genocide of like one people against another people. But, in Cambodia, the bulk of the deaths were not of anybody but Cambodians, Khmer ethnic people, done in by other Khmer ethnic people, right? So it's like, oh, mass atrocity crimes. We can agree that it's mass atrocity crimes, but for some, the term genocide would be exclusively for how the Khmer Rouge killed, say, the Vietnamese or the ethnic Chinese or anybody that was not ethnically themselves Khmer. So it's almost like for Cambodians, they can't even wrap their heads around the idea that, wait, it's not a genocide against us. It was a genocide against everybody else but us, but yet we're the ones who died in the greatest numbers. Yes, from a technical standpoint, that is what scholars would say, that there's no such thing as self-genocide or auto-genocide. But, I think that these are just technical terms for what indeed happened, which is that 1.7 million people died, and that those who were targeted included ethnic Chinese, included ethnic Vietnamese. So yes, they died. There weren't that many of them to count up to 1.7 million, because the bulk of them were actually just urban dwellers like my family. So anybody that lived in the city was targeted as like, okay, you've got to move to the countryside and you've got to grow rice, you've got to do hard manual labor. And even if the goal wasn't you're going to be killed, it was through just the movement of people, the lack of food, the forced labor, you're going to die. I mean, and Western academics who supported the Khmer Rouge would write about how you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, a metaphor for the idea that, well, you can't have a revolution without killing people, without people dying. That's unfortunate. And so on. But of course, are they the ones who actually had to live through that? No, they were the ones watching from London, from Ithaca, from elsewhere while studying the revolution, or from even Sydney, Australia, where they celebrated after the Khmer Rouge won with a party, a costume party, no less.
Right. If I can just interject for a second, I believe that even if the target is a political group, it still can be considered a genocide. Not only that, many German Jews, and they were Germans, nationality-wise, they were Germans, and that's considered a genocide. Even though it's their own people, it was their own people.
Right. I want to say though that maybe the Soviets objected to the definition of political group. I think there's something about it where they didn't want that, because of course they were so busy killing their own people for political.
What are the differences that were pretty apparent to you about the Holocaust and Khmer Rouge?
All right, so I talked briefly about sort of the targeting of urban dwellers because they were seen as the enemy. I think that's a different. I mean, I don't think there was a agrarian versus city dweller sort of bifurcation going on with the Holocaust, definitely. So there wasn't like a need to like we need to target city people. They're the parasites that are sucking the blood out of the wealth of the nation or whatnot. But that was the narrative of the Khmer Rouge. They believed that city dwellers were basically parasitic and not not producing anything, and they needed to be moved to the countryside where they would grow rice and produce foreign exchange via the export of said rice. And so that's definitely a difference. I think there's also the obsession under kind of a Maoist communism with this agrarian identity, that the revolution needed to begin with people who lived in the countryside, who were close to the land and so on. Of course, the irony is that the leaders of the Khmer Rouge were primarily educated in France and maybe failed electrical engineer types, along with people who got their PhDs in Marxist economics and who believed that somehow the way to national wealth did not absolutely went through industrialization, but it had to be with the people in charge, and so we have to begin with an agrarian phase first, and then we move on to industry. But to believe that exploitation through capitalism of a country like Cambodia and its people, well, they subscribe to that. I don't think that was necessarily anything that the Nazis advocated, and I don't know that there was anything against homosexuals. But then again, this is not at a time when maybe there was much of anything having to do with that, at least publicly, in Cambodia. So I don't think that was targeted. Of course, Muslims were also targeted. So there's a community of Muslim Cambodians known as the Cham. They were definitely targeted. I mean, anything that is alien other, right? The othering of people. So the Vietnamese, ironically, fellow socialists, communists, and revolution were targeted. But at the time that we escaped, it was a window when they were okay still with their neighbors. So the irony is that at that time, we said we were Vietnamese. We claimed to be Vietnamese. So that's because they said, if you're Vietnamese, you can leave to go to Vietnam. That was okay. A few months later, if you said that, you would be killed. So right. It was just a fortuitous window, literally, because my mom was being told, hey, if Auntie, if you claim to be Vietnamese, they're going to get you. They're going to get you. And I don't know, she had the courage, the bravery, perhaps the temerity to believe otherwise at that moment. And she made the right bet, because they were serious about repatriating Vietnamese nationals to Vietnam. And so just that little window when it was still okay, afterwards, you would have been done for if you'd claimed to be Vietnamese under the Khmer Rouge at that time. So the differences are more in the sense of economic. City dwellers who would be better to do because they lived in the cities. They're just going to have access to more resources versus agrarian population. There was also an aspect to it where they basically took all the kids and reprogrammed them. So my brother, for example, had to go live in among other kids to be taught essentially to no longer respect his parents or to respect elders. So a reordering of society from the standpoint of what had been a very traditional society where you respect your elders, you're very, you don't speak out of turn, to you're now the boss, even as a child. And of course, he tells of escaping and coming back home to sleep in our hut of a home, and then being able to spend time with the family. But even as recently as a few months ago, he was texting me, this is not my oldest brother, but my older brother, and saying, "Oh, I had a nightmare the other night. Yeah, he remembered seeing in a hut next door a man who had hung himself, and there were all these flies all over his face." That I couldn't help but tell a friend who's a psychologist that my brother is clearly suffering from PTSD. He is remembering the things that he suffered as a young boy, watched and saw, and it's haunting him in his dreams, and he can't really wrap his head around it, and he needs help. And I tried to communicate, and of course he's like, I'm fine, but I just he's in his mid 50s, suffering all these decades and sharing only sporadically these experiences via text of all things. And he even sent me a picture of a hut that he recalled looked like this, when he went in there. So it's very clearly very vivid in his mind, and I feel for him. I mean, it's a burden he has to carry even now, since we're going to speak about intergenerational trauma, and in that case, it's the actual trauma he saw and experienced himself, and
How about yourself?
can't shut down his mind or quiet his mind from thinking about.
How has it affected you? Now, you don't recall seeing any of this, but they say that it takes 7 generations to clear out this trauma. How has it affected you? And what makes you think that you're different and that when did you realize, before we even tell me about yourself, how it impacted your life, when did you realize, first of all, you lost your dad, and I'm sorry for that you lost your dad on the journey to escape the Khmer Rouge, but then you were raised by your mom. She was a single mom raising you. And when did you realize that she was different in the way she raised you from the way your friends were raised, and how it impacted you?
Well, I think, to understand the full context of it, I mean, I should share sort of at least the outlines of the journey, in the sense that, as she told me, she was able to pass 2 exams, language exams, one by the Khmer Rouge cadre and one by the Vietnamese, soldiers, whether she's asking them questions in Vietnamese, testing her. And she wasn't Vietnamese. I mean, she just learned a little Vietnamese on the side as a child from kids around her, and using that to be able to pass, of course, with the help of so many along the way who were able to help her improve her Vietnamese. But that kind of, it's such a blessing and a burden, right? It's like you've been picked to survive. So now you should do something with your life. You should excel in incredible ways, or you could totally understandably maybe be completely unable to live life sober as a result. I mean, like, you can just imagine that there could be people on either side. So all these refugees from Cambodia that arrived in the late 70s and 1980s, some of them end up, in gangs and then jail, and then are now facing deportation or have been deported, even though they never maybe even set foot in Cambodia. Some of them were born in Thai refugee camps. So I think, for me at least, the burden of all of this means that I have to, I feel as though I have to carry the torch in terms of continuing to tell the story that my mother, because of her limited language fluency, wouldn't have been able to share necessarily, but also to carry forward the lessons of her life, right? To be able to say that her life mattered, and the fact that she saved 5 kids, and that those kids now have another, 10 kids or 15 kids, actually, to be exact. It's literally the idea of you save a life, you save the world in that sense, and it's an incredible honor, but also it's not like, we made a documentary after my TED Talk. The Singapore film director approached me, and I've shown it many times. And I'm it's my voice in there. There's some animation. There's my mom's voice in there. Early on, when we were screening the film, there is, I think, part of it is that you kind of, even though I don't have actual memories of it, it is a little bit traumatic to have to watch over and over the story, the narration, listen to it, and so on. But nowadays it doesn't faze me much to do that and to sit in. I think in the past I might have had to exit the room a bit for the parts that were more cutting, but that's the kind of thing. I don't know how to describe it, whether it is continued intergenerational trauma. as transmitted through a documentary that I myself helped to make, and an award-winning one that I narrated, but that it really kind of, it's inexplicable. Maybe I should explore this further in terms of what does doing something like this, screening a film 100 times, 200 times at various events, do to the individual or the subject of the film. Does it cause lasting impression, or cause some damage as a result of that?
Your vision for young people. So, Paul, what is your vision for young people? How will the next generation transform trauma into, let's say, activism, resilience, and potentially leadership?
Well, young people are, I mean, I don't want to be corny about it, the next generation and so on, but the young people have both the blessing and the burden of history, right? So they can learn from history and not repeat the mistakes, and whether or not history repeats itself or it rhymes, as Mark Twain has said, what matters is that they have the advantage of reflecting upon history, being able to see the mistakes of history, but also not be chained by history in some ways. And I say this without without a bit of irony in that I feel as though that's why they're the future. They're the ones who can take the lessons of history, but also not be burdened in the way of, well, now we can't think outside the box because that's the only way we can move forward, but rather to be free of that as well, and to move forward in their lives and to find better ways of dealing with the problems that we've created as humanity, and that we can solve as humanity as well. So, for young people, I would say that the lesson that they can bring, or the vision that they can have, is really one of hope and of not being burdened by necessarily the trauma, right? So everything I've described about how my brother's experience, my own experience has been, it's because I think we're still burdened by that trauma, but yet we can relate and share our stories to others so that they can understand them, generate empathy from them, and as opposed to tuning out, tuning in, and being able to make the world a better place as a result of those lessons and those experiences, right? So we talk about never again, and of course it keeps happening over and over again, but the hope is that at some point when we say never again, it really does mean never again. It really does mean that our world will have learned something from its mistakes of the past and not repeat them.
We say the same thing regarding the Holocaust. We say never again. And we're hoping that the younger generations will take this broken world and be more creative with it in how to address these things. I think that the younger generation is a lot more creative than we were, and maybe they'll have a better solution. I want to thank you, Sophal, for joining me today. It was a wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time. Maybe we'll do this again. And I'd like to thank our listeners at hmTV for joining us today on this fascinating discussion with Mr. Sophal Ear. Until next time.